Tracy Matthews. Welcome, and I very much appreciate you showing up today and sharing your time with me and the audience.
Well, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. Let me run through a quick introduction for everybody. Tracy Matthews, founder and CEO of the Flourish and Thrive Academy, co-founder of Creative Rules the World. You're a jewelry designer, entrepreneur, author of The Desired Brand Effect, speaker, business strategist, and in your early career, you were a yoga instructor, which I thought was very interesting. You're a visionary leader, an entrepreneur who spent over 20 years blending creative artistry with smart business strategies. As the founder of the Flourish and Thrive Academy, you empower jewelry designers and creative entrepreneurs to scale their business with confidence and clarity. Through the Creatives Rule the World, you're fostering innovative thinking and collaboration for creatives, aiming to take their business to the next level. You're a sought-after mentor and speaker, known for your transformative approach to branding, marketing, and mindset. And you're passionate about building supportive communities and equipping creatives with tools and systems to achieve sustainable growth while staying true to their artistic vision.
All true.
Excellent, excellent. So, like I said, I only have one scripted question, and that literally is, where were you born and how was early life in Tracy's
Oh, where was I
lifetime?
born? I was born in California. My heart goes out to everyone who's dealing with the wildfires. I was
Yes,
born in Southern
absolutely.
California in Fullerton, which is a suburb of Orange County. And what was my childhood like? It was chaotic, honestly. I was
Really?
raised as the second oldest of six children for most of my life. And then my dad got married when I was an adult and had two more children later in life. So it was a journey of chaos and fun and creativity and all the things.
Right, right. I can imagine. So you were with that experience, are any of your siblings creatives as well?
I would say I come from an entrepreneurial family. So I would say the majority of the people in my family either have their own business, are some sort of consultant or business owner, or they work in an entrepreneurial role for another company.
Gotcha.
There, I think two of my sisters have a job and one of my brothers has a job and but they're all kind of in entrepreneurial roles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
They're entrepreneurs, I guess we would call
Entrepreneur, yeah.
that.
For sure.
Yeah.
The how was elementary school for you?
How was it? Well, I went to Catholic school, so it was
Okay. Had a little bit of
what you'd
structure.
expect Catholic school to be. It was a small Catholic school. I don't know, maybe like 20 people in our classes. I
Okay.
don't remember a lot of my childhood actually, probably because it was so chaotic. But I remember like what I remember about elementary school. Well, I remember the nuns. I remember certain incidences that happened. Like this is a funny one. One of my friends, I'm still friends with her today, but like she cut off a lock of our teacher's hair and
Oh,
made
wow.
a like I don't think she really knew what she was doing, but she made a voodoo doll with it, and we all thought it
Oh,
was like such a joke. Not because of anything. I mean, when you look back at that, it's so mean. Like she cut off this woman had like very long hair, but it's just like the crazy things that kids do, right? So
sure.
um, a lot of my, I would say from first to sixth grade was spent daydreaming, honestly,
Really?
because I was diagnosed as an adult with dyslexia, and it makes sense because a lot of the members of my family have dyslexia.
All right.
But I'd always wanted to think of myself as someone who was smart, and I had a misunderstanding of what dyslexia was at that time. So I never shared with my family or my parents or anything like that I was struggling in certain areas. But I did have a hard time paying attention, and when I was bored, I would go off somewhere else. So
Right.
I don't know what that's about, but I'm sure someone could analyze my psychology.
For sure, for sure. Now, with that, is it just words and letters or is it numbers as well?
Actually, I can read. That's not really an issue for me. It's more about transposing numbers. And the way that this was discovered as an adult was that I was in a therapy session after I gotten divorced. I was about 30 years old, something like that. And I had already started my jewelry company a couple years before, and I had shipped an order to a store. And they got back to me and said that they were like, that I shipped the wrong order and they were mad at me or whatever. I mean, I was taking it as they were mad at me, but like
Yeah.
they shipped the wrong order. So I was telling my therapist this, and the therapist was like, well, do you think you have dyslexia? Does this happen all the time? And, at that time I was like, oh, no, no, I don't have dyslexia. But when I realized that it would happen over and over again. So we would have to check the orders. And a lot of our store owners would take pictures of their orders, which ended up being super helpful in the long run.
Yeah.
But that's how I found out. It was actually surprising to me because I always did fairly well in school. It wasn't like, it's just, there are certain areas where I noticed that it happens. And I don't know what your listeners know about dyslexia, but there's so many different kinds of dyslexia. You can't really compare them. Like I have a sister who is severely dyslexic. She has a hard time reading and spelling and all that stuff. But I used to like crush it in spelling bees. And I think back then, I was born in the 70s. So back then, I think a lot of people thought of dyslexia as this reading thing, like you had a hard time reading, but it translates in so many different ways. But it's such a gift for creative people
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
think is unrecognized.
Yeah, absolutely. I've over the course of my career, I've met many creatives, artists who have either had ADHD, ADD,
Hmm.
dyslexia, um, mental health issues. I myself have had mental health issues my entire life,
Mm.
struggles with that, um, anxiety, attempted suicide.
Oh,
So
wow.
I can relate to the difficulties that arise with certain issues with that. But I think a lot of times too, those are things that enhance the creative abilities within a
Yes, this is
person.
true. This is true.
Um, yeah, I have a bit of a reading comprehension issue where I can read a paragraph, and once I'm finished with the paragraph, I completely forgot what I read. Or
That
I'll go
happens to
back,
me too
I'll go
sometimes.
back and try and
That's why I listened.
read one sentence and then end up thinking I'm in the second sentence and I'm really reading the first sentence all over again. So
Yeah. I think also too, for reading comprehension is interesting because there's all these different learning styles, but they don't teach you the different learning styles in school. You're just forced to read. So if you're not a visual
yep,
learner and you learn through like audio or auditory digital or something else, or you're a kinesthetic learner, you learn by doing, like it's hard for you to fit into a box because not everyone learns the same way. And Jason and I talk about this all the time. He's like, Jason's my partner.
yeah,
And he was helping me with my business for a while. And he's like, your team meetings are so hard to follow. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, because you process externally and that's how you learn and hear. But everyone on the team is lost because the majority of people are visual learners. So you need to start sharing your screen or share the agenda or whatever. And that was actually like a huge aha moment for me. And now on our team meetings, we're always sharing the screen. But because I listen, like I'm not really paying attention when I'm looking at something as much. It's more about like processing the information through hearing
yeah,
that understanding that like really helps you understand how people consume information because it's different. Everyone's different.
for sure, for sure. And I think that's the beauty of kind of where podcasting has gone.
Hmm.
But as when it started out, everything was just audio, right?
Yeah.
I think now with the influx of the video component, I think that gives people a little bit more of ability to connect
Hmm.
with the guest. And that's how I listen is I've got to watch it because
Exactly.
if I can't see what's happening going on, I lose concentration.
Focus. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. With that, um, being in the Catholic school, did you have opportunities in terms of like classes and stuff to be creative at all? Or was
Well, I
it just
mean, I
strictly
think
general ed?
just like any parochial school curriculum, there's like your standard classes like math and science and reading and
Yeah.
spelling. I mean, this is before the internet. So,
Right.
and we had art too,
Okay.
a couple times a week. So I remember making like Kleenex boxes in I want to say Sister Linda's, but I think it was Sister Teresa's class. And, like the turkey hand paintings. I
Yeah.
didn't really explore like artistry more until I was in like becoming more of like an artist where you're coming up with your own ideas until I was in high school.
Okay.
I
Okay.
would say, yeah.
So let's fast forward then. Let's fast
Yeah.
forward into high school. And going into high school as a freshman, what was that like for you? Did you have to change schools at that point, or was it
Yes,
still?
yeah. So I went to, it's funny. My parents wanted me to go to the next Catholic school and I aced the exam, but then I wrote in my essay that I didn't want to go there, so I didn't get accepted,
Oh,
which is
that's
kind of
classic.
funny because I ended
Yeah.
up going to a Catholic university. I don't know why. I'm not Catholic. I was just raised Catholic. It just that was the course. And so the transition was a little bit different because when you go to a small, I mean, my high school was also small. It wasn't super big at the time. I think we had 300 in our graduating class, but the in in the school that I was in, like we'd have 25, it was pretty small. So, and a lot of these people who, when I went to high school as a freshman, a lot of them had gone to school together forever. So I didn't really know anyone. So it was kind of like starting over. And I didn't realize it was going to be that hard.
Yeah.
And the most heartbreaking thing, and like I'm still close to this woman today, but I had become like best friends with this woman or this girl in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. And the reason why I wanted to go to that high school, was because she was going there. And when like literally the second day of school, she made like a whole bunch of new friends. And like, I don't think that she was intentionally doing this, but like kind of ditched me. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so hard. What did I do? I should have gone to the other school with all my friends. Um, but it was a great journey. Like I don't regret it. I love doing that. And early on, like I met I had a boyfriend and all the things that everyone wants, and
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
high school. So
For
it was
sure.
fun.
For sure. Um, I read in some of the research that I was doing before the interview here that I believe it might have been in your book where you stated that most of your siblings were athletes.
Yes. I come from a very athletic family. At least the first six that I grew up with, they're all exceptional athletes. My
Yeah.
brother played professional football. My younger sister was very good at soccer when she was playing. My older sister played basketball all the way through college. So there was a lot of sports going on. And yeah, I think the story that you're referencing is that athleticism and being an athlete was really acknowledged by my parents. And like, I wasn't necessarily an athlete, so I had to try to shine somewhere else. And for me, being like a creative soul, creativity was my expression. So, and even though like I was fit and I did work out, it wasn't like I was never very good at competitive sports, which was interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is interesting. And two, with that being, I can kind of relate to both sides of it because I did play sports through junior high, high school, and some college, basketball and soccer. Um, so I understand what the competitive element of that is,
Mhm.
and especially if it's within the family, it
Yeah.
can get extremely competitive, even off of the
Yeah, that's
field
true.
part.
It's interesting because I'm the second in birth order, and I don't know if you know anything about birth order, but it's the second oldest is a love position, or at least
Yeah,
that's what they say.
yeah,
In birth order, they cycle through six, and then it starts over if there's more than six in the family. So it's interesting to me because, like, I'm competitive. I'm very competitive, but of all my siblings, like, I'm one of the least competitive of them.
oh
Like,
wow,
if we're playing, like, Jason's super competitive, he has to win at everything. He's got two teenage daughters. When we're playing games, like he crushes them. I'm like, can you just give them a chance? And like, I don't really care about losing. And they are also competitive. And one of the daughters has a really hard time. She's like, I don't want to play if I can't win, which I don't necessarily think is the best thing. And the other one and
yeah,
him are just like, I have the tiger. And I'm like, whatever, you guys. It's not fun if like the only thing about playing is winning. And this really funny thing happened over the holidays because we were visiting Jason's parents in New Mexico, and they taught me how to play this game Shanghai. Like literally, I was crushing everyone, and I don't even know how. Like the people who've played for years, like I beat them all. Like I
That's
kept
great.
winning, and they're like, "How is this possible?"
That's
It's
great.
so funny, and it
That's
didn't
great.
like it wasn't even like phasing me. Like it was more to me like hilarious that I kept winning. I was like, oh, this is great. Because I honestly don't care either way when it comes to certain things. And I think part of the reason why I'm probably like that is because I wanted to be good at sports when I was younger.
Hmm.
I wanted to get that attention from my um, dad, especially probably like, go
Yeah.
to my psyche. He like really, that was kind of like the thing that he went to was sports games.
Okay.
And because I just wasn't naturally gifted at like team sports, I just got okay with the fact that like, all right, well, you might lose sometimes. That's just part of it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, and two, I think it's an interesting point. Um, even if you didn't like excel to a level that maybe your siblings did, um, I have a feeling that that probably gave you some particular concept of teams and working with a team, and
Yes,
potentially how that plays out into your creative career over the businesses and stuff that you have.
right. This is true. Although running, like playing on a team, being a team player is very different than leading a team because you're
For
like the
sure.
coach, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
um, I have a lot of opportunity always. I feel like that's like one of my biggest growth areas is leadership. And I say that because like at every stage that I've gotten in business, I've been an entrepreneur for over 30 years. I've had two different jewelry lines, probably launch another one this year. It's on my vision board. I've launched two coaching companies now and launching a brand new offer in a different business in a couple of months. And one thing that I know is that, you have to suck up a lot being a leader because, like, you're as a business owner and someone who is out there, like, making it rain and like creating impact and supporting people and changing people's lives in your way, right? Because I do truly do believe that all artists are changing people's lives with the art that they create when someone buys their work. The impact might be a little bit different than you think, but it's powerful, like what we're able to do. And leadership is interesting because you're taking all the risks, you have all the stress, you have all the financial responsibility. It's like either a big win or it's sometimes a massive loss. And to stay cool and composed in those situations when things are maybe not going your way is really the work, right? It's hard. And I would never say that it was something that came naturally or easily to me in that way, but it has been, I believe, like the biggest thing or the biggest piece of work that I've had to. And I'm going to use the word endure. I'm not sure that that's really the right word to endure in being an entrepreneur because in the beginning, when I first started out, back in the 90s, I would hire people because I liked them,
Right.
not necessarily because they were going to do the best job. And I had a really hard time setting boundaries and holding people accountable for their roles and responsibilities. And I remember the first office manager I did was like, she'd be like running over me. I'm like, I'm going to leave now, or, not really getting work done, but I'm paying her to do work, wanting to chit chat all day. And I'm like, okay, you got to get this stuff done. And this was before, thank God it was before cell phones. But then later down the road, when I moved my team to New York with my jewelry company, I had someone who worked for me and she was a smoker. Literally every 15 minutes, she'd be leaving to go outside to smoke and checking her phone all day. And I feel like it's not that, I think the hard part about like these situations, it's like, how do you like enforce the rules that you want in your company and become a leader where there's expectations and KPIs and outcomes and all these things?
Yeah.
And so the reason why I'm even sharing any of this is just because it's been a journey. Like it hasn't always come naturally or easily. And I've gotten better as I've gotten older, but I'm emotional and I'm creative. And, there is a time and place for all those things, but it's hard when it comes up in the workplace because you're human at the end of the day, right? You're not a robot.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah. And one thing that I find really interesting is I've mentored a lot of people who've left corporate and come to my retreats, or they've worked with me either in a private setting or taken some of our programs. And they're one of my students who's come to some of my retreats. I do a lot of like they're like business masterminds, but there's a lot of personal development and growth development in
Yep.
them.
Yep. Introspection.
Introspection, yes. And there's a couple that come from corporate. They have a really hard time like expressing their
Yep.
emotions or feeling like that there's anything to really work on because they were shut down
Yeah.
early
Yep.
on in their career. Like emotions are not allowed
Right.
in the
Right.
workplace. It's either this or that. And you must be buttoned up and professional and all these things. And as artists, I feel like we're so different because part of what makes our art so amazing and part of what makes us so incredible at the work that we do is that creative juice that we have. And a lot of times it's emotionally backed. So
Yeah.
it's hard to sometimes contain the emotion. I don't know.
No, for
My
sure.
feeling.
Absolutely.
Leadership is the, my growth area.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. I relate to that a lot. And I think a lot of the listeners will as well. It's the emotional aspect of creativity is usually what you end up experiencing when you gravitate to something, whether it's a piece of art, a piece of jewelry. Um, it, my opinion of it is that you're gravitating to the energy that's coming off of the piece, um, not necessarily all the time because of who it is, or how much it is or any of that type of stuff.
Right.
You're connecting with it in a different way. So that's amazing that you're able to see that as well. I want to circle back to um, ending high school and starting to look at college. Did you go off to college? And if so, did you go there to study any creative field?
Yes, I went to Loyola Marymount University. I did not go to technically study art. I ended up going into the communications school where I thought I was going to be a broadcaster, but the school's in LA, very competitive field. And I didn't ever really get into the communication department. And so what ended up happening is I met a guy who ended up being my husband later, many years later. But I was like madly in love with this guy. For the first time ever, I got a D in a class because we were like ditching class to go ride around Hollywood with this, with the heater on and the sunroof down. Like it's
Yeah.
just what kids do, and
Yep.
in
Yep.
college, like random
Right.
stuff. And my parents were in the middle of a big divorce battle, so both of them basically just told me like we can't continue paying for this education. It's too expensive. Um, if you can figure out how to do it on your own, great. But unfortunately, at that time in California, or maybe it was nationally, I'm not really sure,
Yeah.
that it doesn't matter how many financial liabilities your parents have or how many kids or any of that. If they made over a certain amount, then you were ineligible for financial aid or even getting grants or anything like that. So
Yeah.
I stopped going to school for a couple of years and I worked full time, still lived in the area and still live with my college roommates. It felt like I was going to college with them. And when I was 21, my mom passed away suddenly. And so her death was the thing that got me into being an artist for a career. Because when she died, I was the last person to see her. She died of a blood clot after elective surgery. So it was very shocking. It was not something that we expected.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't think of the term of like elective surgery and like dying in the same sentence,
Right.
but she died shortly thereafter. And because of that, I was able to talk to the school. I was able to get a grant. I was able to get financial aid since one of my parents was passed away. I think my dad and I at that time weren't really in touch. So I had kind of signed this thing. I think it was like a trend at the time. You could kind of like divorce your parents, but
Right.
it seems weird to me anyway, because like you're an adult, like I was 21 years old and they're still looking at my parents' finances to go to school. Like I was putting myself through school at those last 2 years. So I was able to get some financial aid and go back to school, but I had to work full time. It was the only way that I could make it work. So I wanted to be a studio arts major, but I had a lot of classes to catch up on because I'd taken some art classes as electives in the first 2 years that I was at university. But most of those classes were really fulfilling whatever the standard classes you have to take to graduate.
Yeah.
So when I went back, I ended up with a humanities major in European studies, and I was able to take art classes as part of that major. And that's when I found my jewelry making class. I
Okay.
took that as my first art class that applied to the major. And I found out that I was like naturally gifted at it. It was very random and unexpected. I always thought that I was going to own a boutique and have a retail store. I thought that that was going to be my career and my path. And then ultimately, I ended up going the other way and being one of the designers that the retail stores carried. And I loved it. And
Okay.
this was in the 90s. I think this was like 1991 to 9. I graduated from high school in 89. So I think, yeah, from like 1991 to like 95 or so was when this was all happening. And I was working in stores, boutiques at the time, and this was the beginning of the independent designer scene for jewelry. And this was way before Etsy or way before a lot of these platforms out there. And it was so cool to see some of these emerging artists come on the scene where they were making really unique pieces that you wouldn't see in like a department store or something.
Right.
And I was really inspired by it. So I decided, I'm like, well, I'm going to try to do this. I started making some jewelry on the side, and my friends wanted to buy it. Then people I didn't know wanted to buy it. So I had a side hustle for, I don't know how many years, maybe 7 years before I went full time
Okay.
and did it full time. Yeah, it was fun.
Nice. Nice. Now, was this in the LA area as well?
Yeah, but at this time I was living in LA.
Okay.
Um, I got married when I was in my mid 20s, so like 25. And then after we got married, we moved to San Francisco Bay Area. And
Okay.
that's where we set our roots. And I'm saying we because me and my ex-husband,
Sure. Yeah.
we set our roots there, had a cute little apartment in the marina in San Francisco. And then once Mike got a job, we ended up making the call for me to quit my job at Nordstrom because I was working in retail.
Okay.
And that's when I started the business full time. And it was very scary. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just did it and figured it out along the way.
Yeah, that's an interesting element that I don't think a lot of creatives look at or are even willing to take that kind of a jump or leap.
Mhm.
Um, but it's absolutely a possibility. And I just want the listeners to be able to recognize that you can take that leap of faith and you can believe in yourself. I know that's the only way that I have succeeded is because
Yeah,
I've seen something and I said I want to do that and I just dove in. And
right.
the only saving grace for me was the fact I knew I could draw what I wanted to see as a finished product.
Oh, cool.
So I never had uh, any reservations about diving into any industry that I've worked in. I just did it. So I get that for sure. And with that, starting out, was it rough going at first? Was it a lot of fumbles, a lot of trial and error?
Yeah, it was a different time. At that time
True,
in
very true.
space, it was probably 1998 when I think it was 1998 when I started my business, or I
Yeah,
know it was. And I rented this little 100 square foot little office space
yeah,
that
yeah,
probably is the size of the space I'm in right now,
yeah,
my office at my studio.
yeah.
And I would show up every day not knowing what to do. I had a phone book. I would try to look up stores. I would reach out to my friends asking them like, where do you sell your sweaters to? Or where do you sell your handbags to? Just trying to figure out what the stores were because this was before the internet.
Yes.
And no one was using the internet to put their retail store on it. This was really back to Main Street where people had shops on Main Street and you would go and buy everything from a store.
Yeah.
So there was a huge learning curve, but at a certain point, I was married at the time. We had limited funds. I mean, we were just starting out our life. We weren't making
Yeah.
a lot of money. And I did have a little bit of money saved. So that was the thing that kind of floated me in the beginning and made it less stressful for me to have to like try to figure it out in the beginning. But there came a certain point where my ex-husband was like, you need to start making money or you're going to have to go back to your job at Nordstrom. Like, I can't, like, this was not the deal we made.
Right,
Like,
right. Yeah.
I was going to have some secure finances coming in, but you still have to do that too. And
Right.
you got to figure this out or you don't. So I had to kind of figure out how to schedule my time because one of the things that became super challenging as a new full-time business owner, mind you, I'd been doing this on the side and
Yeah.
it was very easy for me to do on the side because I'm like, oh, I'll just have a jewelry party. I wear my jewelry. People want to buy it off my neck. Like all of that was very easy. Do some shows here and there,
Yeah.
sell the jewelry, right?
Yep.
But having to go and like create your own schedule and make it rain for yourself was really hard. And so I would, once that kind of happened, it lit a fire under my ass, excuse me, to make it rain. And so I would show up every day. I would started working on the most important things that I had to get done in the beginning of the day, meaning picking up the phone, shaking, feeling like I was going to throw up, and calling stores and asking for appointments, sending out line sheets, all the things, walking, up and down the main streets, finding what stores I wanted to sell to and trying to make appointments to sell to them. And a lot of times, and this is the hardest part about it, you show up, you're so excited, you're trying to look professional, you have your POs, the whole thing. And a lot of times they would say no in the beginning because you don't really know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I was so passionate about what I was doing. And I knew that the end consumer liked it. So I knew that it wasn't that I didn't have the talent as an artist. I knew how my instructor in college, my jewelry instructor said to me, Tracy, you have something that a lot of people don't. Like you have this skill set of how to make the jewelry, but also you have an eye for what's trending now. And that combination,
Yeah.
which was very interesting for her to say because it comes from like, more of an art jewelry background, and academia is very different than like jewelry that's sold in production.
Yes.
So it was kind of shocking to hear her say that because most of the people that she was mentoring really were just going to go and make pieces that no one ever wore and they sat in a closet.
Yeah.
So when she said that to me, I mean, I think that she was complimenting me. I took it as a compliment and I was like, I know that there's something here. I just got to figure out how to make it work for me. And so the progression work that I ended up getting into maybe 8 stores, and 2 of them were really good stores. And through introductions, I had a friend named Susie, and Susie sold sweaters. And Susie is like, you have to meet Sherry at the store Metier. And so that opened the door. And then when people would ask me, where else do you sell? And I'd be like, I sell to Metier. They know Metier. So that opened up the door to some other places, including a great store in Oregon called Twist. I believe they're still around. It's one of like the best jewelry stores there is these days. Everyone wants to sell to Twist. It's like Sundance catalog.
Nice.
And being in those 2 stores, I ended up getting some recognition because some reps found me and then they wanted to sell my product. And so I would say my first year in business, and this is, mind you, back in the 90s, early 2000s, I somehow scrounged together making $50,000. I have no idea how, but I did. And then the second year, because I had started hitting my stride, I sold about 150,000, and then the next year 300. So it's just started to snowball because once I got into those doors, it opened the door for all these other places, which became, when the floodgates started to open and that brand really started growing.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
At that point into the second year, obviously you're in more stores, so you're having to produce more. Are you
Mm-hmm.
doing that all on your own, or had you figured out at that time to potentially either hire people in or outsource to a manufacturing company?
That's a great question. So I was living in San Francisco, lots of great art schools there.
Yeah.
And I ended up contacting the jewelry departments and ended up finding jewelry interns who were paid.
Yeah.
So they're paid internships. They would come and it's some of them, like after a while, because people wanted to work for me, we would have these internship trials. So that was like unpaid for a couple of weeks. And then eventually we would hire them on as like a paid intern. That was more a little bit further down the road, but
Yeah.
we had I would find them from these art schools, and it was great because then eventually one of them came to work for me for about 4 years. Her name was Mara. She was my first team member, and that was the only way that I could actually grow. And at that time, even though I was a trained metalsmith, at that time, because of my situation, time, place, all the things, we were making cold fusion jewelry. So I was just designing mostly beaded work at that time. And then eventually we progressed into handmade jewelry and then my
Okay.
fine jewelry and
Gotcha.
men's jewelry.
Yeah.
But it became really easy because some of these students, like, if they had a busy schedule, they could just take supplies home and work on it, on their own. I would pay them per piece. And it made it really easy to hire based on need rather than hiring someone because I needed help and then having to pay them like a full-time salary or something. It created a lot of flexibility for me.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so that was kind of how I started that journey in hiring. And the first thing I hired out, believe it or not, was the making of the jewelry. Because when you start to produce that volume, first of all, like I'm a 7 on the Enneagram. Like I like variety. I like to make new things, which I think is part of the reason why a lot of artists are like always making new things. They get bored really quickly with production.
Yeah.
But to have a successful, thriving business, it's much easier to be able to produce multiples of the same thing than reinventing the wheel every single time. So I
Exactly.
got around that by me designing the samples, and then my team would be the people who actually made the jewelry for the production. And it was a perfect win-win. I got to focus on the areas of the business that I liked the most, which actually ended up being sales and marketing and traveling to the shows and doing all of those things. And then I had other people supporting behind the scenes with the actual making of the pieces.
Okay. Excellent. And I think that that's a key bit of information for the listeners and creatives that are out there that are trying to go into a creative field where they're going to have to end up scaling the
Mhm.
product or whatever they're creating, is that there's multiple ways to get moving, and also too to be able to figure out what is the thing that I want to focus on versus what is the
Mhm.
possibility of the thing that I can just outsource a little bit or hire some
Right,
to just handle that element of it.
right,
If you're the creative and the money is short and you're trying to do everything, that in and of itself is just high stress,
hmm
high difficulty. But getting into your second year where you're making double the first year,
yeah,
you're starting to realize, okay, I can start letting go of some of the control of this and
right,
allowing somebody else to have some of it. Because I know, being a creative myself, at the first start of it, it was I wanted to control everything. I wanted to make sure it was perfect, had to be done the specific way
Mhm.
all the way up. Not till later on did I finally get it through my head that, hey, the imperfections that I see are not going to be what the public sees.
Right,
So
right.
that's I wanted to bring that out for the listeners who are. Go
Can
ahead.
I add to that
Yeah,
as well?
absolutely. Yes.
So the one thing that I see a lot of people, especially artists and creative, the first thing they want to hire out is sales. And I tell you, that's like the worst thing to hire out first
Yeah.
because your customers want to work with the artist. So
Yeah.
I know that it's scary to feel rejected or to feel like if they say no to you, that there's something wrong with you. But it's just a preference, right? Like people have preferences, right? Some people like big, bold jewelry. Some people like dainty little jewelry. I happen to be someone who likes dainty jewelry, but I can really appreciate people who love to wear big ass jewelry like Iris Apfel and stuff like that. It's amazing. It looks great on her. And it's like everything, like especially adornments that you wear are personal, like to that person's personal style. And art is the same thing. Like I bought this hummingbird painting. This is actually a reproduction. It's not an original, but from an artist. I think her name's, I'm going to say it wrong, Ains Carnes or something like that. And she paints hummingbirds and all these things. And I love her work. But if she wasn't there and it was like her husband was there for a minute trying to sell it to me, it's just a different vibe. But when she could tell me her process and the whole thing, I'm like, okay, I'm coming back. Give me a second and I'm going to come back and buy this piece.
Yeah.
People want to buy your work, and that's not the first thing to hire out. I think that there are other things that you could hire out first that would be supportive. And another thing, because I work with people all the time who have built their business in like an old school way, which is great because you get like really this grassroots, gritty way. The marketing also has to come from the artist. Like you have to understand how to market your work to be able to train someone else in your vision of what you want that to be. Because without that, people can tell usually. And it's very rare that someone could just step into your business and be able to market your business online and have a clear understanding of what you do without a lot of testing and trial and error. And that usually costs a lot of money up front because it takes time to figure that out. So the more that you can figure it out for yourself, what you want, and have clear communication around what your brand values are, what your your mission, your vision, your personality, like the aesthetic that you want to put out in the world, like all these things, that's when you can start hiring those things out. And I think that's sometimes artists, I see this a lot, they want to hire the thing out that maybe they don't love as much because it feels personal, that rejection, but without your touch on it, it's not going to be the same.
Right.
So just food for thought.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So third year, you're doubling again. Fourth, fifth year, how is that starting to look for you? At that point, are you still in the Bay Area and shopping everything out?
Well, so I started my business in 98. I moved to New York City in 2006 at the end of the year.
Okay.
I'd since gotten divorced and was still living in San Francisco, outgrowing my space. We ended up moving into a much bigger space for a couple of years on Howard Street and went from 100 square feet to 1,500 square feet. It felt like a mansion. It was
Oh wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
We had
Holy
this really
cow.
cool like brick wall that we painted red. Like the whole thing was really cool. I felt like I had made it there, and I had maybe 13 little production workers helping me part-time as interns or whatever. Some of them now have successful jewelry businesses, which is really fun,
Nice.
that supported me in this process. And then I met a guy. I had always wanted to move to New York City, but I was afraid to do it. And this kind of became the catalyst for that. We didn't stay in a relationship for very long after we moved, but it got me there. And I would tell you, like, my business from the time I started it, for the most part, just kept growing every year. Maybe not doubling, but it did keep growing. We did have like a market crash in 91 or something. And even during that time, my business continued to grow. It wasn't something that,
Was really affected.
no, I wasn't affected at that time. I mean, I was investing a lot of my money back into the business, so it wasn't maybe as profitable as I would have liked it to be. But we continually grew every single year. And yeah, until 2008 when the market crashed. And so it was a great time to be, riding a wave, because I feel like from 2000 and maybe 4 to 2008, like things were so awesome. Like it was just people were buying, like the
Oh yeah.
stores loved it. I kept
Yeah.
adding new accounts. I was getting into places like the Sundance catalog and Bloomingdale's. I launched a fine jewelry line, a men's jewelry line. Like things were great. And I think now looking back at that, it's like people ride the bull market and they're not aware of like what when the bear market's coming. And so that I kind of got taken out by surprise during that time.
Yeah.
And it was funny because I had some friends in New York that work in finance and they're like, oh, terrible things are coming. I'm like, you're so pessimistic. Like, stay positive. Everything's going to be fine. And then 2 months later, my entire business gets wiped out when the market crashed in 2008. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
just I
And
think a lot of people had that same problem.
for sure, absolutely. Many, many. Um, after riding that high wave, going into the '08 and then realizing that this is just all collapsing. What was the mental state like at that point in time? Were
For
you,
me,
yes.
oh gosh, I was a wreck. We had hired a consultant, and I say we because my sister was helping me run the company at the time, and I couldn't afford them. They were like $1,500 a month. We had no money. I wasn't paying myself. It was awful. I went from having like my best year ever to like scaling millions of dollars in sales like over the course of my time and having like a just under 7-figure year. It was like awesome. And then the next year, year over year, the previous year I had sold $150,000 in October. That next year I sold 10, which was like, and it probably would have sold zero if we hadn't gotten the orders shipped out before it caught up about what was happening in the market. All these people we'd shipped a bunch of orders, and then they were saying that they weren't going to pay us, filing for bankruptcy, all these things. It was awful. I
Yeah.
was losing weight. My hair was falling out. I developed a thyroid condition. I was so stressed out because when you have an inventory business, and it's not just like you're not getting paid and then you don't have money to live. Like I had debt that was rolling to finance the production. So we had
Right.
vendors to pay. We had like materials that we had signed for saying that we were going to pay for them in 30 or 60 days, but we couldn't pay because we didn't get paid by the vendors. Like this whole thing turned into this crazy snowball.
Yeah.
And even our factor, and for those of you who don't know what factoring is when you finance your receivables to a third party and they pay you for the shipments, 50% of the shipment or the order that ships up front. Our factors went out of business because so many people filed for bankruptcy on them or didn't pay bills. So it's, it's one of those things that like, I don't know that anyone could have foreseen that
Right.
going down in the way that it did, but it was so traumatizing for me because I felt like a failure. And my first business failed. A lot of people have a first business that fails. And in hindsight, I can look at it now being like, well, it was the circumstances of what was going on. And I'm mentoring a person right now who I've known for 30 years, and she's trying to figure out how to sell online. She's pretty much done the traditional wholesale route all these years. And she's like, Tracy, the only thing that got me through that period was that we had just gotten a $250,000 catalog order and they paid. And she's like, that's the only reason why we even lasted, because if they hadn't paid, we would have been out too. Like everyone was in the same boat.
Yeah.
And the ones who made it were just the ones who could figure out the cash flow beyond that period and work things out.
Right.
But the worst part for me about all of it was that I developed all these relationships with my vendors and then having to go back to them being like, I can't pay you. There's nothing I can do. And just feeling like, you'd spent 9, 10, 11 years developing relationships with
Right.
gemstone vendors, materials vendors, and all these people.
Exactly.
And then you feel bad because they also have a small business that they're trying to keep going. And it's the snowball effect, right?
Yeah. What was the light, if there was one, during that period of time when I can imagine it was dark as could be, because you're watching everything just crumble around, fall apart. And it's not only happening to you, it's happening to people that you're working with, people that you establish business with, relationships with. What was the thing that kept you going when that was all happening?
Ooh, well, I mean, it was great. I had a supportive community of friends around me. And so that was super helpful. And I would say like the biggest guiding light for me was really knowing that I'm resilient and that I've overcome hard things. It's like my mom died, and then out of that, this beautiful jewelry business that I built for years blossomed. And I know that hard situations in business are impermanent, meaning they're going to end at some time. And it is a natural cycle of the economy to have ebbs and flows and to have highs and lows. And so, logically, I would tell myself that it didn't feel very good and it was very hard.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing that was guiding me at that time was like knowing I'm resilient. I can figure this out. I also can hustle. And I also am really good at being guided by my intuition when I let it be. And around that time, I had been teaching yoga. I started teaching yoga when I was about 30 years old. And right around the time that I got divorced. And I taught for many years, but when I moved to New York City, I stopped for a while. I went to a yoga class when I was a member of the Equinox Gym. I went to the yoga class when I was visiting my family in Newport Beach during Thanksgiving, and the yoga teacher didn't show up. And so I was like, some guy in class was like, "Oh, I've been practicing yoga for a month. I'll teach the class." And I was like, "You know what? I'm a teacher. If you guys don't mind, I'll do it." So the group fitness director came in to make sure that I wasn't going to kill anyone.
Yeah.
Taught a great class. Everyone was super grateful. And then they invited me to an audition to actually train there. And I was like, "I don't live in Newport Beach. I live in New York." And he's like, "Well, if you change your mind, let me know and I'll introduce you to the people there." So something told me just apply for, go to this audition. I was one of 6 people who got hired out of 40 people auditioning in that class. And the cool part about it was that I started teaching yoga again. It fueled my creativity. It also allowed me to have health insurance because we were trying to get it through the company and it was so expensive. And my sister, who is my operator, she went back to Columbia. So she was able to get health insurance through school. And it's crazy how all these things just started falling into place, right? So that happened. I ended up winding down the business in 2009 completely because I made a decision at that point. I was like, I didn't really like how the business had evolved and how I was competing. And this was around the time when there was a huge trend towards fast fashion. So like H&M was out and all these places that made like $30 massive necklaces, and the trend became very big again. And I designed dainty jewelry out of like real materials. So my jewelry was like trending down a little bit. Like not everyone was wearing that kind of jewelry anymore. And so I'm like, this gives me a minute to step back. And I'd found the joy of doing custom work for people. And so I started designing engagement rings and wedding bands for a couple of friends. And that led into my next business. And so I remember one of the best guiding lights, you asked about guiding lights or what was the pinpoint of light or whatever.
Yeah.
I mentioned we hired these consultants. I hired this guy named Phil. I can't remember the name of his company, but Cathedral Consulting. He was a very religious man, but my sister had met a colleague of his through a business networking group that she had gone to. Yeah. So we talked to them a few times, and we would have these meetings with them in person in the office is right by Penn Station. And we go, and I'd be really emotional and being like, I feel so torn. I don't know what to do. I don't even know what I was saying to him at the time. And he would speak in parables and show these stories from the Bible, which didn't really land or resonate with me at the time, except for the beautiful storytelling. I mean, the stories landed, but the fact that they were coming from the Bible weren't really like landing with me at the time. But I found it really beautiful because he could always weave it back. He's like, "Tracy, you have a choice right now. You don't have to keep this business going. You can close it. You could file for bankruptcy. You could do all these things. You have a choice. Yeah. And just because you started doing it this one way doesn't mean you have to continue doing it this other way. Yeah. So rethink it, reimagine it, yep. Reinvent yourself." And that was one of like my first massive reinventions in my career. And I sat down, and it took me a minute, but I'm like, how could I do this? I don't necessarily want to be a full-time yoga instructor because I know how much money they make. It's not great money. I still love jewelry, but I don't want to do it the way that I was doing it because the stress of like paying for the shows and running that rat race and all that stuff was so stressful for me. What is a different way that I could do this thing that I love? And that's when I decided to launch my custom jewelry company. And so I officially launched that in 2010. And having those little bouts of like creative expression, like being able to teach yoga and having someone to like sound off of and be able to talk to you about things that made me, that he actually even though he couldn't relate. I mean, he worked for big corporations, but he was great at consulting small businesses. And he reminded me that we had a choice. Like I wasn't destined to this. And also everyone's thinking about themselves. They're not really looking at you. It's not like my business was so big that everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, Tracy Matthews' business went out of business." I just, I think a lot of it, I was like concerned about what people would think of me. Yeah. And no one really cares. And they understand. Like you look in hindsight, anyone I talk to today, they're like, "You're so brave for sharing the story so early on." And everyone was in the same boat, Tracy. Like just some of us had slightly different circumstances, and that's why we made it.
Right.
But in the darkest moments, there's always this thing that comes out on the other side that brings us to our next iteration of who we are and who we're supposed to be.
Yeah, for sure. I want to tie two strings together.
Sure.
That I found interesting in what you just said. One was the fact that the guy who you were having as the consultant, his company was called Cathedral,
Yeah.
consulting.
And I went
And
to Catholic school.
exactly, that's where I was going. He went to Catholic school. So it's interesting, those things in childhood that we experience and don't always understand why they're there.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find those later on in life as being kind of a saving grace moments,
Hmm.
so to speak, with him being able to give you that information of, hey, it's not just this way. You can do it this way. The
Hmm.
other element that I want to point out is that you saw you saw a way for you to pivot. And that's one of the things that I try to bring out with clients that I work with that feel stuck, feel like they're not getting anywhere with what they're going.
Hmm.
But I always try to look at what they have done and what they can do. And a lot of times they don't even realize that they can pivot into another form of their creativity and then
Hmm.
just move forward in it. And a lot of times it's a lot more rewarding, it's a lot more enjoyable, a lot less stressful.
Right.
I find that those are the things that allow them to move on and move forward. Um, you had mentioned that you have these elements where within your career they're like transformational and you're kind of up leveling to a different you, a new you kind of a thing. And
Hmm.
you had made a post the other day that you're kind of going through that right now. With a
Yeah.
little bit of time that we have left, could you share a little bit of what
Sure.
that's looking like?
Well, as someone who gets bored doing the same thing over and over again, like I've been called many different times to expand beyond where to stretch myself beyond what I know. And so I've had this, I wrote a book, which I see, I just noticed that you have my book behind you. Yeah, thank you. I have it too.
Product
I wrote a
placement.
book a couple of years ago called The Desired Brand Effect, Stand Out in a Saturated Market with a Timeless Jewelry Brand. And if you're an artist or any type of business owner in a creative field, I think this book would be really valuable for you. Even though I speak through the lens of jewelry, it's just use the tools to cater to your business. It's great.
Yep.
I wrote that book, and that felt like the height and the crescendo of where I was with my coaching for jewelry marketing. And I love my community, and we have a great business over at Flourish and Thrive. But I felt this tug and pull to expand what I know and to support a bigger audience. And so I'm 53 now, and I'm mentioning that because there are many women who are from the age of like early 40s all the way through 60 who are in this, and men too, I'm sure, in
Yeah.
this process of feeling like, what's next? I've done this thing, like I've kind of done what I can with this thing that I built. What's next?
Yeah.
And they're being called in to do something else, but for whatever reason, what they know is the safer bet or easier to fall into, but
Right.
they are being called in
Yeah.
this new direction.
Yeah.
And so for a long time, since the year that I launched my book in 2021, I had this vision during like a healing journey that I was going to be mentoring children. And it came to me through many different, um,
Opportunities.
well, not opportunities, but just different sources. Like I was
Okay.
in
Yeah.
my meditation, I was doing it like in a journey. I would have an intuitive say, like, I see children around you. And like at that, like I was already at a point where I'm like, I'm too old to have my own children. That's not what this is saying. And I love kid energy. I come from a huge family. As I told you earlier, I have 23 nieces and nephews. We have another one on the way. It's wonderful. I love mentoring my nieces and nephews and seeing what they're capable of. Kids are amazing. They're so funny. And as someone who was dyslexic growing up and not even knowing it, and probably ADHD and all these other things where I had a hard time focusing, going down a traditional career path, like everyone's like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like, I could never really answer that question. I'm like, I want to design wedding dresses. Like, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Didn't know how to do it, but like, it's like, I could never think the traditional path, and everyone's telling you need to go. My dad would say, you're argumentative or you like to debate, so you should be an attorney. And I was like, that sounds boring, but like, okay, maybe I'll think about that. And it wasn't until like I actually landed in a class doing something that I was passionate about, that I had felt like I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up. And it wasn't until I was 21 years old, 22 years old, that I even found that out.
Yeah.
And so on this reflection, there's a lot of people who have, and I don't like using, dyslexia or any ADHD or any of these things as excuses as to why you're a certain way or not, because I think that there's gifts in everything. Like
Okay.
Jason and I talk about this because he's more closer to the autistic spectrum. He's very analytical, literal
Okay.
thinker,
Yeah.
and I'm a more of a gist person. So there's gifts to both of those. Like he can analyze and find problems in things that like I could never identify because I don't think that way.
Right.
So everyone has their unique gifts, right? But it's like what's the best expression of those gifts? And some people are groomed and are best designed by the way that they are built internally to go work for someone else. They are going to find more stability. They're going to be able to just, follow instructions. They prefer that. They just want to kind of show up and do what they're told. Some people like that. That's what they're meant to be doing. Other people are here to bring ideas into the world. And I think in traditional school systems, I mean, it's changing now. There's a lot of these amazing schools that some of my friends send their schools to, like Acton Academy and some of the Williamsburg, some of these other schools that allow the children to kind of like be guided in their own direction of what they want to explore, which
Yeah.
is amazing. But not everyone can afford to send their kids to an Acton Academy. They have to go to public school.
Right. Right.
And so I've been on this like strong desire to be able to go speak on college campuses and high school campuses about creativity and entrepreneurship. And so I am moving in that direction. It's something that I will be doing. But in this process of reinvention, also, I want to be supporting women in a bigger way through their reinvention process, because I've reinvented myself probably like 5 or 6 times in my life already. I'm a 6'3" generator on human design. I have the 3 line, which means that all I do is do things on trial and error. And not everyone is as comfortable taking risks like that and trying to figure it out on their own. And when they are in a process of like wanting to launch something new, or they have a successful business and they want to extend into maybe consulting or something like that, and they don't know how to do it, or they want to, maybe quit their corporate job and start sharing their skills with the world, like that's the community that I want to support. Like one of my friends, Maggie, she's a human design expert. And she's like, I was called to do this. I just left my corporate job and I am so scared. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just letting myself be guided in this process. And there's so many people who are stuck in this reinvention process, or they're feeling called to do something and they're not doing anything about it. And so what I'm launching in the spring, in a couple of weeks actually, is a program called The Art of Reinvention. That's the working title. By the time it launches, it might be a little bit different because we're recording this a couple of months before it goes, but that's the planned title for it. And the promise of this program is that you will fully shape your vision and create a vision beyond your vision and complete offerings around whatever this new idea is that you have. And the best part about this is this is all about creating the space for you to get it done. Because like what people don't realize is that when your heart is up to big things and you have a sacred calling and you're feeling called or moved in a direction, like you have to do it if it's that strong. And putting it off is not doing you or the world a service. Like you're doing the world a disservice by not getting out there. And it's being an entrepreneur and going and being a pioneer and doing all these things that feel risky and scary it's not easy, but like if you're feeling that calling, it's time to act. And so I've seen this so much, like so many of my friends in this process of like building a business that they don't like anymore, building a business or a community that feels like they've outgrown it or something like that. And they're asking themselves the question, like, what's next? Like, I feel like I've mastered this thing and I need to be stimulated and figure out how do I pivot my gifts, my talents, and my skill sets into the next thing that is going to make the impact that I want to do. And I kind of think of this as like a program and a platform for people who are here to start movements, or and it's not necessarily like a massive movement, but their kind of movement, right? And for me, my movement is all about allowing younger people to express their creativity and not try to put them in a box, because that box is the thing that, like, we didn't get to this because we kind of skipped over high school a little bit, but when I was in high school, my boyfriend, who I cared about very deeply, like I didn't know better, I was 15, 16 years old, was walking me to my art class, and all of a sudden just drops this on me. He's like, art classes are for stupid people. And I look
Well,
at him, I'm like, you realize you're taking me to a painting class right now. And then, and because of like the way my brain works, and because I am really driven and wanted to be smart, this is the whole thing why I never expressed that I was having difficulty paying attention in class or focusing, because I wanted to be smart. I didn't want to be put in the other category. I wanted to be in the smart category.
yeah,
I
yeah,
stopped taking art classes for a while because I wanted to be smart. And the best part about this was that I ended up in a biology class for science, because I'm like, oh, he takes science. I guess I'll take science because that's what smart people do.
yeah.
My boyfriend in high school, very smart. He works in biotech now, very cutting edge stuff going on that he was working through. But um, I wanted to be smart, like all these other smart people. So I get into bio, and I ended up being one of the only people in the class that got an A plus. And I was like, how? I'm like, I guess I am smart. And I, looking back at it now, I'm like, I think the reason why I did so well is because like 50% of the class was drawing specimens.
Mm,
It's like you have to have kind of an artistic talent
yes, yes.
to be able to like draw the specimens. And I remember our phone ringing because the teacher, Mr. Gear, asked for our phone number, and we had an upstairs line, which was like the kids line, and we had the downstairs line. I gave him the upstairs line because I'm like, I don't, I want to make sure I get the,
Yeah,
something
exactly.
happens. I pick up the phone, and he's like, "Hi there, it's Mr. Gear. Is Mr. or Mrs. Willard home?" And I was like, and it was me who answered the phone. I was like, no, they're not here right now. Can I take a message? And he's like, is this Tracy? And I was like, yes. And he's like, well, I wanted to call to tell them that you got an A plus in class. And I wanted to be the
Wow,
person that told your parents, but congratulations, you were only one of five people.
wow.
And I was, or three people. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't very many people who got such a good grade.
Right,
And I felt for the first time like I was smart after that. But in hindsight, what I realized is like intelligence, smarts, whatever you want to call it, is creativity, because it's your ability to pivot, it's your curiosity, it's your ability to learn new things and be resourceful when you don't have the answers.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a perfect place to end this with you today.
Mhm.
Um, And I appreciate you taking this time. I know you've got some other things you've got to go to. But I always want to remind the audience as well to listen to your heart and always be kind to your mind. Thank you, everybody.